In 1997, FIFA, the governing body of world football, an organization famous for its incorruptible moral backbone, flew a delegation to Baghdad to investigate a rumor. The rumor was that the president of the Iraqi Football Association was torturing his own players. FIFA arrived, sat the players down, and asked them, in Iraq, surrounded by Iraqi officials, "Hey guys, quick question. Is your boss torturing you?" The players said no. FIFA said, "Fantastic, love the honesty," stamped the file, and flew home. Hold on to that, because the boss in question used to attend matches with a personal notebook, and I need you to hold on to the notebook too, because you are not ready for what the notebook was for. And somewhere deep in this story, there's a football made of concrete. I'm saving the concrete football. Trust me, it gets so much worse before we get there. The boss was Uday Hussein, eldest son of Saddam, and to understand how a man like this ends up running a national sports program, you need exactly two facts about his resume. Fact 1. At a party in 1988, in front of dozens of guests, he beat his father's personal valet to death with a club. Fact 2. He was subsequently shipped off to Switzerland, where he was asked to leave. Switzerland, a country whose entire national brand is staying out of things, looked at Uday Hussein and said, "No, this is too much for us." So Saddam had a problem. His firstborn was too violent for government, too unstable for the military, and too internationally embarrassing for diplomacy. And somewhere in the palace, someone had an idea. An idea so catastrophically bad it deserves its own documentary. They gave him sports. In 1984, Uday Hussein, age 20, zero athletic background, never played organized football in his life, was made head of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and president of the Football Association. Both jobs. Simultaneously, this is like making a shark the head lifeguard because at least now you know where the shark is. The theory, presumably, was that sports were harmless. A sandbox. What's the worst a maniac can do with a football federation? Here's the notebook. Uday attended national team matches in person, sitting in his private box, and he kept score. Not the actual score, his own score. Every misplaced pass got a mark. Every missed tackle. Every shot that sailed over the bar. Each player accumulating a personal tally of mistakes in real time, written down by the most dangerous man in the country. And after the final whistle, the marks were converted, one by one, into punishment. And this is where I have to do something we occasionally do on this channel, which is stop joking for a minute. Because what happened to these players is not a bit. The punishments were real, documented torture. Players who lost matches were taken to Al-Radwaniyah, a prison camp outside Baghdad. They were beaten on the soles of their feet with cables, a method chosen specifically because footballers need their feet, and it maximizes pain while they can technically still be forced to train. Players had their heads shaved as public humiliation. Some were dragged across gravel pits until their backs were torn open, then dipped in sewage so the wounds would infect. After one loss, players reported being forced to kick a concrete ball. That's the concrete football, and I genuinely wish it were a joke. Over and over, barefoot, as punishment for missing shots with a real one. Goalkeepers were tortured for goals they conceded, defenders for goals they didn't stop. Uday called the locker room at halftime to describe in detail what would happen to specific players if the score didn't change. Imagine playing the second half of a football match after that phone call. Imagine trying to take a penalty knowing there is a man in a box above you writing your name in a notebook. One defender, Sharar Haidar, who later escaped Iraq and told the world all of this, was tortured 4 separate times. Once for losing a friendly. A friendly. A match that, by definition, does not count. It counted to Uday. Okay. Deep breath. Because the story now returns to absurdity, and the absurdity is somehow about to involve international sports bureaucracy at its absolute finest. Word of all this got out because of course it did. You cannot torture an entire national team for a decade without somebody's cousin mentioning it. Which brings us back to that 1997 FIFA investigation from the top of the video. FIFA's delegation came to Baghdad and interviewed the players about their treatment. The interviews were conducted inside Iraq, with Iraqi officials present. about the man who ran their lives, controlled their family's safety, and personally maintained the mistake notebook. And FIFA, with a completely straight face, concluded there was no evidence of abuse. The players said everything was fine. Why would terrified men in a dictatorship lie to a clipboard from Zurich? Case closed. FIFA went home, presumably very proud, and Uday kept his job for 6 more years. If you're keeping your own notebook at home, mark that one down under International Institutions, performance of. And here's the part that breaks the sports movie logic in half. The fear didn't even work. That's the thing about running a team on terror. Uday genuinely seemed to believe pain was a training method, that a man who might be beaten for missing a shot would simply stop missing shots. Football does not work that way. Nothing works that way. Iraq had qualified for the 1986 World Cup, their first and only one ever, off the back of a genuinely talented golden generation. They went to Mexico and lost all 3 games, and things only got darker from there. Under 2 decades of Uday's motivational program, Iraqi football didn't sharpen. It cracked. Players faked injuries to avoid selection for the national team. Think about that. Athletes trying not to represent their country, and the best ones simply fled. Star players defected during away trips, vanishing through hotel exits in foreign cities, choosing statelessness over another phone call at halftime. Uday responded by holding players' families as implicit collateral, which is not a sports management technique. It's a hostage situation with a kit sponsor. By the late 90s, Uday was running the Football Association, the Olympic Committee, a newspaper, a TV station, and a paramilitary, a diversified portfolio of nightmares. And the national team was a shell. Then, in 2003, the whole regime came down, and in July of that year, Uday Hussein was killed in a firefight in Mosul. The mistake notebook stopped. The halftime phone call stopped. Al-Radwaniyah stopped. And now, pay attention because this is the punchline history wrote all by itself. Watch what happens to Iraqi football the moment nobody is torturing it. 1 year later, 1. Athens Olympics 2004. Iraq, a country in the middle of an active war whose players were training on fields with no grass, whose league had essentially collapsed, goes on a miracle run to the Olympic semifinals, beating Portugal along the way, finishing 4th in the world. 3 years after that, 2007, Iraq wins the Asian Cup, the entire continental championship, their first ever. A team that spent 20 years being beaten for losing started winning almost immediately once losing stopped being a medical event. It turns out, and I want every gym teacher and psycho youth coach in America to hear this, fear makes athletes worse. Terror is not a tactic. The single greatest coaching decision in the history of Iraqi football was the removal of the coach. So what did the world learn? FIFA learned nothing. They investigated a torture chamber by asking the torture chamber to fill out a survey, and they have spent every decade since finding exciting new ways to look directly at a problem and see nothing. Sports federations worldwide continue to be handed to princes, oligarchs, and fail-sons as personal toys. The lesson of Uday Hussein, that you cannot brutalize your way to excellence, has been carefully written down, filed, and ignored by every authoritarian sports program since. The notebook, it seems, is a hard habit to break. This has been Sticky Storm, where the history is real, the stick figures are innocent, and the governing bodies are always asleep at the wheel. If you learned something today, or at minimum felt better about your own boss, hit subscribe, because we've got a whole archive of history's dumbest true stories, and unlike certain football associations, we actually keep score, honestly. See you in the next one.